Hi, it's Kelsey here again, and I'm going to go over the most basic level of Illustrator, and we might get up to doing your first textile design, your very first textile design, and we're going to use text to do it. We're not going to learn how to draw in Illustrator today, we're just going to learn how to use the toolbars and manipulate text, and you can watch the next video in the series to learn how to make really smooth, seamless patterns. Okay, so let's jump in. I'm going to leave my face on the screen for a second. I'm going to take it away in a minute. This is the first screen that you'll see when you load up Illustrator. If it's your first time using Illustrator, you probably won't have any recent files here. It might just be these, and then create new and open on the side. So we are going to hit create new, indeed. And there's a standard size that I want you to work at when you're working, and that is tabloid size. I think it's also acceptable for you to work at 11 by 14. So we are going to go to print. You might not have these here when you load Illustrator for the first time. So we're going to go up to print, and that is where we can find tabloid 11 by 17. And it says it in points right here, but if we click on tabloid, we can change the units here to inches, and we'll see it's 11 by 17. And it's good to change the units to inches on this panel anyway, because it can help with the workflow. It can help with kind of like scaling things later on. And we are probably all set with these defaults, and we are going to hit create. And it's going to create an 11 by 17 inch page. And actually, I am not blocking much with my camera, so I might leave it on, but we will see. So here's one 11 by 17 inch page, and we don't actually have to make our motifs that big. Remember, motifs are like the small part of the design, or the part of the design that makes up the repeats. So it's the artwork you draw that then gets turned into a repeating pattern. We could make um, a small repeat and have many repeats fill up a page, right? We're going to be presenting a full page filled with your pattern, brim to brim, okay? So let's just go over the basic structure of Illustrator. And actually, if we learn this basic structure of Illustrator, we're actually learning the structure of Photoshop, we're learning the structure of Adobe, of like Adobe products across the board, I mean. So up here where it says, mine says layout, yours might say essentials. And the first time you load Illustrator, it might be on essentials. And I think that working on essentials is totally fine, and it gives you the basic panels up front, but the main difference is that there's no properties bar at the top, and the properties bar is only in this panel over here. So if we switch it to layout, which is what I'm most comfortable teaching in, I think it's the most valuable to learn in, because Photoshop and other Adobe programs all kind of look like layout. So while we're learning while we're learning Illustrator, we're also learning kind of like where we should look for information in a variety of Adobe products. So Illustrator, I've changed it to layout, and what we have all around are a variety of panels. Okay, they're all different types of panels. And in the center panel, in this big panel in the center, is my workspace, okay? And I can actually work anywhere, I can draw anywhere on the workspace. Any of this gray part anywhere over here, anywhere in this whole panel in the center. And then the white page is my artboard, and that is the part that, as long as we get the file settings right, that is the part that will be printed. So anything out here, that won't be included in the file. Um, so that's kind of like your finished product, and then you're welcome to like work outside of the box, which I think is what's so freeing about Illustrator. Not all design programs allow you to work off the page, which is weirdly valuable. So let's talk about the tool panel first, and we are going to make our first object. The tool panel on the left has a whole variety of tools in it, and yours also might be smaller. If you want to have the tools shown that I have showing, you can go to Window, Toolbars, and then I have Advanced on, but it's also totally fine to work with the basic toolbar on, which looks like this. And all panels can be moved around and reattached to the sides by clicking and dragging on this like small textured gray area at the top. I can adjust any panel. This is the basic toolbar, and it's also fine to work on this scale. But I am going to keep mine on advanced because sometimes there's tools that you need and you don't know where they are, and you can access them again. If I shut off my screen, you'll be able to see this dot dot dot, and this is where all of the tools live. So if one isn't showing up here and you need to find it, you would be able to find it in there. Okay. Let's make our first object on our workspace by clicking on the rectangle tool, and there's a chance that your tool here is showing something else. If you click and hold on almost any of these tools, excuse me, you clicking and holding on them, you will find other tools in there. So we want the rectangle tool though, but you're welcome to make any shape, make a star. I'm going to make a rectangle, and we are going to draw that shape. Notice it's completely white, and I just deselected kind of instinctually, and I'm sorry, I like to break things down a little bit more, but this gives us the opportunity to talk about the selection tools. There are two types of selection tools in Photoshop, in Illustrator. There is the direct selection tool, which is the black selection tool. And there is the selection tool, which is the black selection tool. And there is the direct selection tool, which is the white selection tool. And it is nice to get used to hitting V for the black selection tool and A for the white selection tool, because they do very different things. So the black selection tool, if we use that and click on an object, we will select and move the whole object. And moving this rectangle off into space, you'll notice it's filled white, and you might be able to see that it has a black outline. And that's because of the settings that were in this little color section when I drew it, but more on that later. The white selection tool allows us to choose individual anchor points. So we can choose an anchor point, like this guy, and it's nice to select the anchor point and then click and drag on the anchor point, and we can drag it anywhere, and in this way we can create new shapes. And we're going to talk about all kinds of ways to further manipulate shapes later on, but this is the very basic idea. So let's adjust a circle for a minute. We're going to grab the ellipse tool, and with any of these shapes, if I hold shift while I'm drawing them, I will draw a perfect circle, where if I don't hold shift, it might be an ellipse. And let's manipulate this shape a little bit. You might have read earlier in the chapter on my e-learning site about anchors and handles and paths. So Illustrator is a vector program, and all of the shapes are made up of math. They aren't made up of pixels. So you can scale them and adjust them to any size, and Illustrator is really good at handling vectors. So just like with the square, where we can adjust its anchor point, when we adjust the anchor point on the circle, we adjust where the curve intersects with it. And this anchor point is a curved anchor point because it has handles. The handles affect how far and in what direction the curve goes before intersecting with the next anchor point. And it's affected by all the handles and all the anchor points, and they all interplay to make new shapes. Okay, so those are the basics of kind of manipulating shapes in Illustrator. You can adjust where they are, and you can also adjust how they are shaped. The black selection tool moves the whole shape, and the white selection tool moves the individual anchor points. You can select more than one anchor point at once by holding shift. So I'm selecting one, I'm holding shift on my keyboard, and then I'm selecting the other, and then I can click and drag on them and move both of them at the same time. It's handy when you want to like keep a specific angle the same, but you like these two, but you don't want to adjust the rest of the items. So it's good for you to experiment with these, but I'm actually not expecting you to be an expert at using them or drawing with vectors yet. The homework for this first week doesn't require that. You're going to make patterns using the type tool. So now that we've talked about the shape tool, which makes all kinds of different shapes, we can talk about the type tool, which you are familiar with, makes all different kinds of letters. So I've clicked on it, and I am going to click and drag a area to type in, and it automatically fills with a lorem ipsum, which is the type of like fake Latin that sometimes fills placeholders when you're like designing graphic design. It's basically just like nonsense words. Up at the top we can see on the properties panel, the options have changed. So before, where like we did have stroke and fill over here, now we have character and text and stuff too. So I'm going to raise the text up. And we are going to choose a font. And I don't want anything too crazy right now, but you're welcome to choose something crazy. And actually there's lots of very cool websites that sell or give away fonts for free, like I believe the website dafont.com has lots of very cool fonts on it. So you could get like a really cool custom font and work with that to make your pattern. You can do any of that stuff. And you're going to get more explanation on the pattern in one of the next videos, or on the homework in one of the next videos, or one of the next pages anyway. It might not be a video. We we can type whatever we want. I'm going to just use 2 letters right now, or let's do 3. I'll just do the word and. I'm going to keep it real neutral. And with the type tool you can adjust it, and we can adjust the size and if it's italicized or whatever. All right. This is fine to work with, and I think we could make a pattern out of these, but I think it's more interesting if we like kind of manipulate the text a little bit to practice using the direct selection tool and the selection tool. And to do that, we have to turn this into vectors. And there's a special button for it, essentially. We are going to, with this selected, with the black selection tool, which makes a difference, we are going to go to Type, and then Create Outlines. And you could also do Shift-Control-O. And this turns it into vectors. So if we actually click with the white selection tool, we can see all of these anchors on it, and we could start adjusting them. But actually, I am going to take it one step further. I'm still going to have it selected with the black selection tool, and notice that the letters are connected. And they're moving around as a group still. I'm right-clicking on them and choosing, or if you're on a Mac, I think it's Control-click or Alt-click. Right-click, and we can choose Ungroup. You can also go to Object Ungroup. There we go. And now it should just be the individual letters. So I'm going to use these letters to explain the fill and the stroke, and also to explain transformation. So first off, transformation. If Illustrator is always in free transform mode. You don't ever have to turn on transformations, which basically just means scaling or rotating. You can always do it freehand using your black selection tool. And it's the tool that we use the most, so it'll feel like you're pretty much always in it, I feel like. If I hold Shift while I scale, I will keep the proportions, so I can keep this long, thin vibe to it. Or if I don't hold Shift, I can change the proportions, right? So Shift or no Shift. And you don't have to make a readable word with the text. The text can be used to make, I've had people use text to make flowers or anything. So we can adjust any of that too. But I think I might even just make a pattern out of the letter D for this project. And in the next videos you will see the how to make like a more dynamic pattern, essentially. Okay, so we've scaled it. Let's rotate it a little bit, give it a little bit of a jaunt. And I think what I can do is I can just like put these inside it. So I'll make these really small. And I can use my arrow keys to adjust if things are getting too finicky, which is nice. And actually, if I don't want to use, if I don't want to scale using these, if I want to scale more precisely, you can easily right click and choose transform, and all of your transform options are here. So if we want to do scale, we can scale it down to 75% of the size. Make sure that uniform is checked there and hit OK. And we'll gain more familiarity with that in some of the next videos. So let's manipulate some of the anchor points really quick. We have a lot of anchor points in this, but here's a corner that only has one anchor point, and we can talk about a couple ways to make it into a curve. So I'm going to zoom in there. Now, for me, my first instinct to make an anchor point into a curve, let's say we want this to have a nice slope to it, is to come up to the Properties panel, which again has changed. The Properties panel changes all the time. Come up to the Properties panel and choose Smooth. So where it says Convert, this would convert a smooth point to an anchor point, and this is going to convert an anchor point to a smooth point. And there we go, and it adds handles, and we can adjust the handles. Illustrator in recent years has added another way to make corners into curves. So if there's a very hard corner like this, it gives you this other dot next to the anchor point, and it's important to distinguish them. This dot turns the corner into a circle radius, essentially. And you can actually see it says R35 or R.35 inches, and that's how far away the center of the radius of this curve is from the edge. So I can release there, and now that's a more perfect curve. So we'll probably talk more about all of that later. But those are some very basics about changing the shapes. Again, the white selection tool is what I use to change any anchor points or individual outlines. And the black selection tool changes or selects the whole shape and also allows you to transform the whole shape. So let's change these colors a little bit, and to do that we are going to break into some of our windows over here. So we've talked about tools on the left, and we've talked about the property panel at the top, which changes depending on what you have selected. The tools on the right are completely customizable based on what tools you have been using recently, or like what tools you need and have open. Okay, so if I'm ever talking, well, let's talk about some of the most basic panels that you'll definitely have out. One of them is the Swatches panel. It looks like this. Come on. Yours might look a little bit different. Maybe it looks like this. There's all kinds of settings you can change. I like to have, there's always options in these windows over here. And I like to click on the options and say, large thumbnail view, please. Show me that color. And your swatches panel is a great place to choose colors. It's one of the, there are a few options though if you're going to change colors. If you can't find your swatches panel, or if you ever can't find a panel that I'm talking about, you can go to Window and then find that panel and see swatches is the only one checked right now. That's because it's the only one open. I have my windows collapsed right now, and yours might look like this. Oops, hold on. That's a little sub panel that popped out. Yours might look like this. Nope. Yeah, they might look like that, and they also might look like this. If we click up here on this little arrow, expand panels, it will turn and you'll be able to see kind of like all the panels at once like this, which I find visually overwhelming, but I am also really familiar with all of the symbols of the panels and all of that kind of stuff. So that might not be what works for you. What I find second best is having like just the words there and then clicking and seeing the panels. And all of these are custom for me, and you should get comfortable adjusting the panels. Okay, so I have my color and my swatches panels in the same little grouping. And I can add anything to this grouping. Let's say I want my brushes panels over there, and I can even store this, over here if I wanted to. But I think that's a little wild. I definitely like to have the traditional setup of all my windows over here and just my tool panel over here, but that's how you adjust. So if I wanted to take my stroke and my symbols panel and put it over here, I can do that. Um, and if I wanted a third layer of panel options, I could add that. Play around with the panels, get used to them because it's handy. Okay, select the object. We're going to change the color. So I'm going to find my color panel, or my swatches panel is my favorite. And we're going to take a second, we're going to distinguish between the fill and the stroke buttons here. And the same buttons are actually over here. And actually similar buttons are up here in the properties panel. So you can switch the color in the tool panel, the properties panel, or in the swatches panel, and all of those options are valid. I like the swatches panel because I like to be able to have color options and click on the options, and you can also save colors in the swatches panel. So if we want to change the fill color of this, which is the color that the whole object is, we are going to make sure that this fill button is in the front. It shouldn't look like this with the stroke button in the front. We are going to choose fill, and let's give it a bright color. Okay, so this object does not have an outline, but if we wanted it to have an outline, we would choose the stroke and then choose another color, and we'll give it a dark color. And now it's kind of hard to see that outline. We can easily adjust the outline of any object in the properties panel. So up at the top, I'm kind of always checking the top while I'm working to see what options are up there, and it's worth experimenting with some of these options. I can change the stroke up here, and I can also change the width profile. So if I choose one that gets thick and thin, it gives it this kind of interesting dimension. Okay, and we can make it even a little bit thicker, and we can always choose another color. Okay, so I'm going to change the fill color of these letters really quick. Right now there's no stroke on these, and that's what we want. If we want to remove a stroke, let's say these have a really hideous huge orange stroke and it's just not working, we would select them and we would choose, I'll even zoom in on this so you can see how much it's not working. I'm just using the scroll wheel on my mouse to adjust the view. We would select them, and then we would choose this little this little no color symbol. I call it the Ghostbusters symbol sometimes. It means no color. Who are you going to call? No color. And actually this same symbol can be found over here. So it's really easy to remove the stroke in the toolbar too. All we have to do is click on this little none symbol. If I hover over it, it says none, no color. Okay, same thing over here in the swatches panel. We make sure that the stroke is in the front. It's the one that has no center. It kind of looks like a square with no center. We choose none, and then it gets the little Ghostbusters symbol through it, and it's only the fill that's filled. And let's give that a nice dark purple color. It's going to be great. I'll do the same with the N. So hopefully that all makes sense. fill, solid square, stroke, kind of empty square, inside, outside, Ghostbusters symbol to have no stroke or no fill, right? If we want to have no fill on this, we can choose X and have no fill. Okay, so we are going to make a custom color really quick, and we can do that by double clicking on the color over here in the toolbar. So I'm going to double click and we get the color picker to come up, and we can choose a new color. And we can save that color by clicking the little plus sign in the Swatches panel. Really, the Swatches panel is like the only panel I am mentioning right now. I think I'm going to mention one other panel, but it's nice to familiarize yourself with this one. So we can name the color something specific if we want, or we can just hit OK, and a new swatch shows up. So then we could apply this, or we can do that in any number of ways. Let's make a pattern really quick, but I want to give this pattern a background color. Excuse me. I want to give this pattern a background color. So we are going to return to our friendly rectangle tool to make this this rectangle, and we're also going to learn about Illustrator's stacking functions. Okay, so if I select the object, or if I draw a rectangle, and I'll give it a better background color than that. Let's make it like a really light version of this. All right, we've obscured our beautiful artwork using letters. So I'm going to right click and choose Arrange, Send to Back. I've selected this rectangle object with my black selection tool, and right now it's on the front of the stack. Illustrator stacks everything on top of each other like sheets of acetone, essentially. And we want to send this to the back of the stack. It needs to be the background. So right click, Arrange, and then you can choose to send it all the way to the front, all the way to the back, just one backwards or one forwards. And this is my favorite way to rearrange stuff, but actually we can take this opportunity to talk about layers. So in the layers panel, you can see that we only have one layer right now, and you can put as many objects as you want on each layer, and they each have their own stack on it. So if I make a new layer down here, and again, if you can't find your layers panel, you can go to Window, Layers. I'm going to make a new layer. And now you can see we have a layer 2, and we can make our own stack of objects on this panel. Right? So these two, they're on their own layer. And no matter what we do, no matter how many times we choose right click, Arrange, Send to Back, because these are on their own layer, they will only rearrange the stack within their own layer. Right? So if I click on this and choose right click, Arrange, Send to Back, it will go to the back of the blue, but it won't ever be in back of the objects on layer 1. So each layer can hold as many objects as you want, and we can actually see the stacks of those objects by expanding the layers. So if we expand layer 2, we can see there's tiny thumbnails of my blue circle and my purple circle, and we can see that indeed the blue circle is on top of the purple circle. So if you want to, you can also rearrange objects in here. So if we click and drag on these layers, they will adjust. we can also do that on layer 1. We can click and adjust. Like my rectangle is now not on top of the A and the N, or it was like in between the A and the N, it was blocking them. So here we have adjusted that, and now we can see all of them. And we didn't have to right click and go to arrange send to back, which is also a fine way of doing it. I sometimes find, like, because I will let like each layer have, you know, hundreds of objects on it sometimes, I find looking at these expanded overwhelming. I tend to just right click, arrange, send to back, and kind of figure it out from there. But it sometimes is helpful to know about these options. So that's the layers panel. And why don't we go ahead and include these guys in the pattern, and we can practice putting a fun stroke on them. I'm selecting them both with the black selection tool, and I'm coming up to stroke and making it a lot thicker, and we're gonna make it thick and thin like the D, and we can do that to both of them at the same time, even though they have different fill colors. Notice when I have those two selected at the same time, I'm holding shift to select them at the same time. The fill over here has a question mark in it because you're selecting objects with two different colors. If I want them to both become the same color, I can just make sure that that question mark box, the fill box, is in the front, and then choose my new color. So I am going to make this box as small as I can. Unless you want there to be a lot of space in between it and its neighbors, which is fine too. It just depends on what you want. And we are going to define our first pattern. I believe we've talked about all of the basics that we need to for today. The properties panel up at the top, changing depending what tool you have selected, depending what object you have selected. The tool panel and some of the basic tools like the text tool, the rectangle tool, the swatches panel where we can change the color, the difference between the fill button and the stroke button, and the layers panel and like the very basics of the layers panel. Okay, so one thing I just noticed is that this background has a stroke on it, and what will happen is if you leave the stroke on is you'll get a grid on your pattern. You'll be able to see a visible grid. So we want to make sure that we turn the stroke off of the background. And then we are going to select it. We're going to go to Object, Pattern, Make. And it tells me here the new pattern has been added to the swatches panel, and you can see a little thumbnail of my artwork there. Any changes made while in pattern editing mode will be applied to the swatch upon exit. So it's saying we can still change things, and it will update when you hit done. Okay, and what we see is a rendering or a repeat of the objects. Let me actually hit, yeah, I'm going to hit Control minus to zoom out. Control plus zooms in and Control minus zooms out, or you can familiarize yourself with the zoom tool. So if you have a lot of shapes, your computer might run kind of slow while it's trying to do this, and a good option is to make sure you're showing only 3x3. Sometimes your computer might, I don't know, for some reason auto set to show 9x9, and that means it would have to render all of those shapes all at once, which is hard at this scale in this particular program, which is the pattern options program. Or the pattern options section of Illustrator. So we have a D, and we have the background, and we have some options over here, and this should automatically show up the pattern options panel. So where it says tile type, we can adjust, and remember we talked about these in one of the past videos, what structure of the repeat we want. Okay, so we can choose grid, which is what it's in right now, where it's just a straight tile type, which is also called a straight repeat. And we can do brick, which is this kind of like subway tile offset vibe, which is pretty fun for this pattern. And we can do brick by column, which I think I might like the best out of those three options. For this super basic pattern, we have the flexibility to be able to just try all of those different options and choose our favorite one. In the next video, we're going to talk about a more directed approach where you decide what type of pattern it's going to be pretty much early on in the design process. There are some other options here, but we made a pattern that's so basic that we don't really need to adjust it. If we want to see what the pattern looks like with more pieces, we can try pushing our computer to render it in 9x9, and you just want to make sure to switch it back. And then we're going to come up to the top and hit done, and this is going to save the changes I've made, which is basically just telling it I want it to be a brick by column. So I'm going to hit done, and all of that can be a little bit jarring. Basically what's happening is I've selected all of my shapes. You have to make sure to select all of them for pattern options to work, and I'm clicking and dragging with the black selection tool around them to select all of them. And we are going to object pattern make, and then it's taking us into pattern design mode and showing us the pattern in repeats. And when we hit done, now we're back in regular design mode. So I'm actually going to select these and move them off the page. Like I said earlier, you don't have to work on the final page in Illustrator, and this is going to be essentially like what we save and what we submit to homework. If you did three projects like this, where you did a straight repeat, a brick by row, and a brick by column, if you did all three of those and they were all really basic like this, that would complete the homework assignment for this first assignment, because I know you're just getting used to Illustrator. So let's fill this page with our pattern now. We need a rectangle, and actually we can fill any shape, anything we draw with our new pattern. It's great for illustration, but I'm just going to draw a rectangle that's the size or bigger than the artboard here. The artboard is the white space. And then I'm going to come over to the pattern, and I've selected it, but I've accidentally applied the pattern to the stroke. And this happens all the time, and it's really not that big a deal in this case, but it is something to note that that is possible, and it's barely visible at all because the stroke is so thin. So I'm going to choose the none symbol for the stroke, and then make sure the fill is in the front and choose new pattern. And there is my pattern. Now, if you wanted, imagine this is an 11 by 17 inch page, which is the size of a magazine open. So if you can imagine it like that. So like this would be the center of the magazine right there. If you wanted this pattern to be this big, that's amazing. And you should, honestly, you should print it this big. But we might want to display it at a smaller size. And we're going to talk so much more about scale later, so I don't want to overwhelm you with scale now. But I do want to note that you can adjust the size of patterns that are filling objects, right? So you can choose from any fill here, right? There's a gradient fill, there's a solid fill, and then there's our custom pattern fill. And you can adjust the scale of it. So if we go to transform, scale, if we just adjust, if we check off preview, it's still scaling 75% because that was the last thing I made, but I've got 75% in uniform right now. And I'm going to check off preview. It's scaling the whole rectangle, but if we uncheck transform objects, and remember the objects are like each individual shape, so a rectangle is an object, we uncheck that, it only transformed the pattern. So now that only the pattern is smaller. So I'm going to leave preview checked and I'm going to adjust the scale smaller. And this is my favorite way to adjust numbers in Photoshop and Illustrator, is to click in there and then keep your mouse over it and scroll with your scroll bar, with your scroll wheel on your mouse. That's my favorite way. But you can also just click and type in. And we can get this to the size we want. So maybe we want this to be a much smaller pattern, or whatever we think. But it's important to consider the size of the pattern, and we're going to talk about other ways to convey that later on. The next and final, probably most important step is saving. So we probably should have saved earlier. Save often, save often. We can go to File, Save, and save it as an Illustrator file. And an Illustrator file is a .ai file, and it's very important to save that file. And also keep all of your original artwork in that file off to the side, and all of that is going to allow you to come back into these and edit them later. Okay, so we are going to call this and I guess and pattern, and we're going to hit save, and all of this should be good. It's good to make sure that create PDF compatible file is checked, but that's like the only thing that would ever give you trouble, and that you can always resave it with that checked, so it's not even that important. But that's your .ai file saved, and you can open that up later. You would open it up and you would have all of this stuff exactly like this. So I would be able to come in here and then like change the colors, make a second colorway for this, right? And we would happily be able to do that very easily. Now we don't want this to be in the JPEG accidentally, so we're going to go, we're going to make sure that we check off the right settings there when we export this this JPEG or TIFF or whatever file type you want to save it as. Go to File, Export, Export As, and make sure you check off Use Artboards. That's the most important thing. The white square we had, that was an artboard, and we can check off Use Artboards, and then we can choose Export. And we can, we would then have, well, this is a PNG, but you can choose the right file type and export it. I think it's okay to submit JPEGs to me. A PDF is maybe easier. You can just go to File, Save, and choose a PDF. But if you want to save it as a JPEG or a TIFF, you can go to File, Export, Export As. So we can hit OK. The file type is all the way up. Awesome. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. I really want to make this style of teaching work for all of you, but I think the ability to pause lectures is very valuable. So I will talk to you all later.